This is the laptop I've been using to edit all of my YouTube video. With Ryzen 5800H CPU, RTX 3070 laptop GPU, and 64GB of RAM, it sounds pretty good, right? But the truth is, it can barely hold up. Every effect I add seems to be sucking the life out of this poor thing. And finally, after editing a client video that requires 4K 60fps delivery, it broke me. Hi there, I'm John. Welcome to my channel where I share my opinion. Today I'm gonna talk about my PC upgrade, the specs, the performance, all the good stuff. And if you stay long enough, I'll also share some tips on optimizing DaVinci Resolve performance, even if you don't have a very powerful PC. If you think this kind of content is helpful, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the future videos. DaVinci Resolve is a very GPU-hungry program. With some simple edits on my laptop, it was fine. Until recently I started to work on more visual effect, more motion graphics in Fusion, it started to lag behind. Even some simple Fusion effects like zoom in, text animation, it's gonna cost a lot, so my laptop cannot even play back in real time, so I spend half of my editing waiting for the render cache. For my own YouTube videos, it's kind of fun. If you haven't noticed, I've been uploading my video in 1080p for a while because some of my projects just cannot properly render in 4K. But when I'm trying to deliver for a client, it's kind of have a hard requirement on the format I have to deliver. So it really slowed down my process, and that's when I decided that I need to get a better PC for this kind of work. It was quite a journey to get this PC. If you haven't checked the price of the RAM these days, it's kinda insane. So building this PC from ground up was not an option for me. Luckily, I do have a working system in Shanghai that has a pretty good CPU and motherboard. I contact my brother so he can dismantle that system and send me the CPU, motherboard, and RAM, as well as a couple SSD for me to work with. So now everything that's left is a GPU, a power supply, a CPU cooler, and of course a case. So here's the spec of my new setup. I have an i7 13700KF CPU with 64GB of DDR4 RAM, an RTX 5070 Ti GPU from Nvidia, and 8TB of SSD in total. 5070 Ti is probably one of the best GPU for DaVinci Resolve in terms of price to performance ratio. It has 16GB of VRAM, which is very important for 4K editing and rendering. It can make the difference between being able to deliver or not. 50 series GPU from Nvidia also have huge advantage on AI features and hardware accelerated decoding. That's why I didn't consider an older generation card or an AMD counterpart. For the SSD, I basically moved two 2TB SSD from my laptop, and I added a 4TB SSD just for games, cache, and proxies. Of course, this setup is not all that perfect, especially in 2025. For example, I'm still using DDR4 RAM, but like I mentioned earlier, getting a RAM upgrade is pretty expensive nowadays. And even though my CPU does support DDR5 RAM, I still need to upgrade my motherboard in order to support them. And filling all 4 RAM slots on motherboard means the memory controller in CPU need to work harder to make sure the system is stable. And enabling XMP is probably not recommended. This is a mistake I made 6 years ago when I purchased these RAM sticks. I should have gone with 2 32GB instead of 4 16GB, since I'm going for 64GB in total. And because I didn't know better, I also enabled XMP, making the system super unstable when gaming. Every once in a while, the computer just shut down completely, leaving the image frozen with audio still playing. I always thought it was a GPU problem, but it's actually RAM. So you do need to be careful with that. Ideally, if you know how much RAM you're going for, you always go with 2 sticks. And by doing that, you allow yourself to put more RAM stick in the future if you need to. Also, a CPU come with KF at the end means it doesn't have an integrated GPU. That means it doesn't support QuickSync. QuickSync is a very important feature for video editing because it can accelerate the decoding process for many different codecs. But fortunately, I do have a 50 series GPU which allow faster decoding for codec like H.265 10-bit footage. Missing QuickSync is not a huge disadvantage for my system particularly, but if you do want to build a new system, I would still recommend getting a CPU from Intel with an integrated GPU. The building process of this PC was pretty smooth. One of the disappointments is that I do like to put the fan behind the radiator, but this case is designed specifically for putting the fan outside. So by mounting the fans behind radiator, making the whole build look less fancy because there's no light outside, and also the dust filter doesn't fit properly because the radiator kind of blocked the slot it's supposed to slide in. Moving the SSD, especially the system drive, directly from a laptop to desktop is quite a bit of a process. First, I need to deal with a BitLocker, which is not that huge of a problem, but if you want to do that, you do need to be careful. Make sure you have your phone around to log into Microsoft account to unlock your SSD. For DaVinci Resolve, I do want to make a clean install, but the problem is the registry of my system is a little bit screwed up. So I did need to do a registry hack to do a clean install of DaVinci Resolve. And after that, I mess around with some overclocking for the GPU. I added 300 MHz for the clock speed, and I added 2000 MHz for the memory speed. Did some stress tests, and it seems to survive, so everything is good. And now finally, it's the result of this build, how it actually works in DaVinci Resolve. We are looking at a 1080p timeline with 4K footage. This is actually how I like to edit because this gives me a better performance when I'm editing footage, and I always have a choice to bump it up to 4K if I do want to export in 4K. And you can see the scrubbing is very smooth. I'm not using any proxy, I'm not using any render cache. It's just raw performance with B-raw footage mixed with some H.264 footage and some fusion clip. And the most impressive part is it can play back smoothly without any stuttering for the most part. So in theory, I don't think I need to use proxy anymore for my future video edit because it seems to handle it pretty well. But generating proxy is still a very good practice because you still want to save a resource for some more GPU intensive tasks like fusion composition. And the biggest headache for me, the fusion effects like this zoom in effect, is running real time. Means I don't need render cache anymore. Even if I'm dealing with something slightly heavier, all I need to do is use quarter playback resolution and everything gonna run smooth. Alright, as I promised, now is the time for some bonus tips if you're using DaVinci Resolve on a not so powerful PC. Even though I'm not a super experienced video editor, I am working with DaVinci Resolve with a not so ideal PC setup for a while, so I do know a thing or two about optimizing your performance. The first thing I want to mention is the difference between render caching and playback resolution. I've seen many videos talking about optimizing performance, but they fail to mention that render caching and the lower playback resolution doesn't work together, which means if you want to render cache, you have to play at full resolution. If you want to play at a quarter resolution, you cannot render cache. For a low spec system, especially for my system, I choose to render cache because for many fusion effects, my system cannot even play them back properly at the quarter resolution. Render caching is the only way for me to preview them smoothly. Another thing I want you to know that if you're working with a less powerful setup, you need to generate proxy for every video assets. Don't skip anything. Even though you're playing back H.264, H.265 footage, when you are editing them, you put a lot more stress on your system, which increase the chance to crashing it. Of course, whenever you're dealing with render caching or proxy, you need to choose the right codec. For PC, you want to use DNX, HQ, SQ, whatever you want, and for Mac, just stay with ProRes. If you're playing back your timeline, it's just not quite reaching the real time, but it's almost there. Maybe you want to close the media and inspector panel because they actually hurt playback performance. Another setting you might want to check in your preference is minimizing interface update during playback. Disabling live save can also improve your performance and stability. Because live save saves your project every couple seconds when you're editing, especially when you're working on a less powerful system, it can put a lot of stress and it increases the chances of crashing your system. And unfortunately, live save might actually successfully save the crashed version of your project, which make it unable to open in the future. So even if you want to use live save, you have to enable project backup for at least every 10 minutes. And here are some tips if you're using Fusion for your work. Try to use Saver and Loader Node or Cache to Disk to pre-render your composition before you view them on edit page. The render cache from Fusion page doesn't translate to edit page. If you don't render them out, you have to wait for the edit page to render caching it again, and it's usually slower than Fusion's Saver node or Cache to Disk. Also, whenever you are making animation, use motion blur sparingly, and if you have to use them, make sure you use keyframe to disable motion blur when it's not necessary. Another good way to optimize Fusion performance is use render in place. Render in place can allow you to pre-render a certain part of your project, and the good thing about it is that you can also decompose it in place so you're not losing your Fusion composition. And finally, if your computer really cannot handle Fusion, it actually may be able to handle After Effects. A very good way that I found to work with After Effects is actually using a feature not a lot of people are talking about. It's called VFX Connect Clip. This allows you to select different versions of your VFX render from After Effects in DaVinci Resolve timeline. I'm not going to talk about it in detail. I will link a video from Creative Video Tips, which has a very great explanation how VFX Connect Clip work. Okay, I think that's it for the video. I'm actually very excited and I can't wait to edit this particular video with my new setup right now. If you're enjoying this video, please make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.